Scarlet, so remind us, how exactly does a stock get into the Dow?
Well, here's the thing. The Dow is different from the S&P and the other indexes because it's a price-weighted average. It's not based on market cap. So you have a lot of lopsided members in there. Visa was the most heavily weighted stock in the Dow Industrials until today. Before that, IBM weighed pretty heavily as well. And the Dow didn't have Apple, which many people would argue it does not make it a good representation of the overall market. Now that Visa has split its stock and Apple has entered, you see that Goldman Sachs is the heaviest weighted member of the Dow Industrials. It'll have the most sway, followed by 3M and then IBM. Yeah, Apple comes in at number 5.
Not a lot of industrials in there.
Yeah. You wonder why it's called the Industrial Index anymore.
Back in the day, it had a lot of
David Blitzer's got prodigious chops at this, and he was adamant. If they don't split, they're out. You wonder if there's a pressure on Goldman to split.
You wonder if there's a pressure on Goldman to split, but the trend in recent years has been not to split their stock. A lot of companies back in the 90s really pushed for splitting their stock to make themselves more appealing to individual investors. But you've got a U.S. stock market that's dominated by institutional investors and ETFs that don't care about the share price of the stock.
Ellen Zentner, I want you to prepare to get nostalgic as I show you a chart that I prepared last night. So Google has a service called Ngrams where you can actually look at the number of appearances that a word makes in its massive corpus of books that it's scanned in from all over. So I looked at NASDAQ, S&P 500, and Dow Jones. These are mentions of these indices in books and newspaper articles. So what you see is from the 30s, there's just not that much mention of financial indexes at all until the late 60s. Then it's the Dow. We reach peak greed is good in the mid-'80s. People stop talking about the Dow. They start talking about the NASDAQ. Then the dot-com bubble bursts, and now we see the slow growth of the S&P 500. So, Ellen, the question to you is, do you miss the Dow? Is it even relevant?
Well, let me put it this way. When I look at the chart that you prepared, it is an interesting chart. All of those indices, whether one falls out of favor or another one comes to the forefront, they've all grown sharply over time in terms of the mentions as you measured. And that's alongside the phenomenal growth in financial wealth. In the global economy, not just the U.S. In terms of falling out of favor or which one is favored or which one is not, I can't say what that means for which ones people will decide to invest in. I don't know that households do it like that. Say, well, which one is the most popular? I'll invest in that one.
The parlor game is Apple a blue chip stock? Scarlet Fu, what is a blue chip stock? How do you define that?
Blue chip stock is one that's widely held by people, and people feel that if they don't invest in it, they miss out. We actually put together this great chart that showed what the Dow Jones Industrial Average would have looked like if the index compiler added Apple way back when.
And the answer is a big number. A
big number, yeah. There's a percentage point difference of 59 percentage points. Dow with the Apple and without AT&T would have gained 221% versus the 162%.
John Rogers of the CFA Institute, former president, is the Dow an anachronism? I mean, the S&P is where it's at, right?
The Dow is not used widely at all by index funds or by ETFs. It's really
but we all gauge off it. The Dow's at 18,076. Yeah, everybody knows that number.
It's something of an anachronism in terms of actual use. Yeah,
I actually have numbers on how much money is indexed to it. $33 billion indexed to the Dow Jones Industrial Average versus $1.87 trillion for the S&P 500.
That's really interesting.
And does it change Apple's investor base at all?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Does it change Apple's investor base at all?
I mean, most people who wanted to own Apple already did. I mean, a couple of ETFs like the DIA will have to pick up some Apple shares today, but you're talking about $500 million.
Did she do okay? Should we have her back?
Please.
You don't need to ask that question.